What if Zion Lutheran Church was known throughout Redmond, Bend, and beyond as a church where the gospel is preached, where the lost are found, where believers are equipped, where the needy are served, where the lonely are enfolded into a community, and where God gets the credit for it all? What if we were known throughout our community and beyond as that kind of church? Last week I said that within a half an hour of 1113 Southwest Black Butte Boulevard live about 180,000 people. That's our service area for our congregation here. What if Zion Lutheran Church were known throughout that larger community as those kinds of things, where the gospel is preached, where believers are equipped, where the lonely are enfolded, where God gets the credit for it all? That's what we're going to be talking about during these 2 months of September and October as we're focusing on marks of a healthy church. Now today our focus is on ministry as the first mark of a healthy church. What if Zion Lutheran Church were known as a place where believers are equipped? Where believers are equipped. That's ministry. That's the first, although they don't necessarily come in an order, that's the first mark of a healthy church that we're going to talk about today. But before we get to that, let's take a little diversion. What about those Ducks? What a game, 56-7. I mean, when they have their game on, I mean, who can beat those guys? It's unbelievable. But, you know, when you watch football, you notice that the action is on the field. But when you watch the game, you also notice that the majority of the team sits on the bench during the game. Most college teams have about 125 players on a football team, so you figure with offense and defense and special teams on the field, during that day, probably 2/3 of the team sits on the bench, or they're sideline spectators. The majority of college football players are bench warmer Bobs, is what we used to call them in Minnesota, after bench warmer Bob Lertzema, for those who are old enough to know much about Minnesota football. Well, that's football. That's football, where 2/3 of the players sit on the sidelines or on a bench during game day. But it's kind of like the church. It's kind of like the church. In most churches, of most people who show up on game day on a Sunday morning, most people don't get involved in an active ministry throughout the week. Most churches are filled with ministry spectators or ministry bench warmers, but not necessarily filled with ministry participants. After all, it's easier to watch a game as a spectator, but if you don't get onto the field on game day, there's something missing about what happens during that time. It's much more fulfilling and rewarding and significant to be on the field in game day. It's also much more fulfilling, rewarding, and significant to be involved in an active ministry. Now, remember, as another picture, we're going to be mixing metaphors a little bit. Remember the story of the disciples being in a boat in the middle of the storm, and Jesus comes out to them walking on the water. I preached on that and mentioned it at least twice before. Peter says, "Hey, Lord, if it's you, bid me to come out to you on the water." And Jesus said, "Come." And Peter got out of the boat and started walking on the water. He sank, of course. Jesus saved him. But focus for a moment on that time when Peter got out of the boat. When he got out of the boat. When he got onto the playing field. What were the 11 disciples doing? You know? I mean, they're kind of sitting back. They're sitting back. Blankets around them, their hats on, watching Peter get out of the boat and onto the playing field, again, to mix metaphors. They weren't going to step up to the plate. They were going to remain safe and out of danger. But those 11 disciples were actually in danger. If they stayed in the boat and never left the boat, eventually they would become boat potatoes and die of boredom and stagnation. It's the same thing if you sit on a couch, if you sit on your lazy boy with the TV remote and watch football reruns all week, you'd eventually die of boredom and stagnation, because just sitting there watching as a spectator, your vital organs would eventually quit. Being a boat potato, a couch potato, isn't where life is lived. But I do think that millions of people will attend church today around the world as pew potatoes or as blue comfy seat potatoes. Millions of people will attend church today who want some of the comfort associated with spirituality, but they don't want to take the risk of getting out and following Jesus out of the boat and on the ministry playing field. Getting out of the boat, being on a ministry playing field, is what we call ministry. It's faith in action. It's acting on what you believe. It's giving of yourself for others. Our gospel for today is what's called the Great Commandment, where Jesus is asked about the greatest of all the commandments, and he says, love God and love your neighbor. That's the mark of ministry. It's not just sitting in church on the comfort of a Sunday morning where the pastor preaches a sermon, you eat some great snacks during the fellowship time, and you don't have to do anything else during the week except show up for the next Sunday morning. Loving your neighbor as yourself, loving God, is faith in action. It's ministry. It's doing something with what you hear and learn and experience on Sunday mornings. Now think of it another way, another kind of metaphor or analogy. What is your picture or your metaphor of the church or this church? For some people, their picture of the church, their metaphor of the church is a place of retreat from the world. You come to a spiritual place where you can hear great music and meet spectacular people, and for an hour each week, you just get to retreat and come to a place where you don't have to do much and where you don't have to deal with the stuff of life that's out there. Others see church in the same kind of way as a metaphor of an oasis where there's a place of refreshment in the midst of a parched desert world. For others, the church is kind of like a filling station where you come to get filled for the rest of the week, as a refuge, as an oasis for the trauma and issues of life. Other people think of the church as a spiritual spa, where you come and just relax, not have to do too much, but just have the spiritual waters flow over you and around you. And I used to think of church in that way as a place of retreat, oasis, refilling station, spiritual spa. And the church needs to be that by all means, but it can't be just that. I want to offer you a different metaphor today as we talk about ministry being one of the marks of a healthy church. And that metaphor for the church is a propellant. A propellant is something that's used to move an object by applying a motive force. Church is a propellant to move you by applying a motive force to align your life with the way that God wants you to love God and to love those around you in ministry. You see, I'm the pastor here. I'm the pastor here. Make no mistake about it, but you are the ones who do ministry. You are the ones who do ministry. Many churches have in their bulletin, I'm sure you've seen it, Pastor Eric Burtness, ministers all of you. Many churches have that, but many churches don't mean it. The pastor is the one who is seen as the one who does ministry, and the congregation is oftentimes along for the ministry ride. But if this next decade is going to be a great decade in the life of Zion Lutheran Church, like I talked about last week, a great decade where believers are equipped and empowered and engaged, that means, I think, that there needs to be a different paradigm of the church being a propellant to move sideline spectators or ministry bench warmers onto the ministry playing field. We need to propel folks here in order to be a place where this is a ministry where people are engaged, empowered, and equipped. In a moment, I'm going to tell you 2 ways that we're going to be doing that over the next while. But the first step is to recognize that my role and the role of our church council is to engage, empower, and equip you for ministry. Equip, empower, and engage you for ministry. Now, I hope you're feeling a little bit uncomfortable and maybe thinking, what? Me? Engaged, empowered, and equipped for ministry? I'm nothing special. There's not much I can do. Ministry, some people think, is for others, but it's not for me. I'm not a minister. I'm not good enough. I'm not talented enough. I don't have enough time. I'm not qualified. I'm not cut out for ministry. But if that's what you think, then remember some amazing people in the Bible who didn't think that they were cut out for ministry. In the Old Testament, Jacob and Esau, Jacob was a cheater. King David, had an affair. Noah, after he gets off the ark, builds a vineyard and gets drunk. Jonah ran from God. Gideon, we talked about this summer, was tremendously insecure. Miriam in the Old Testament was a gossiper. Rahab was a prostitute. Sarah was impatient. Elijah was moody. Abraham was one old dude. In the New Testament, Peter had a tremendous temper. Paul was a silent bystander at a stoning. Martha was a worrier. Zacchaeus was short, and for goodness sakes, Lazarus was dead. So, what's your excuse? Can God use you or not? I mean, God doesn't call the qualified. God qualifies the called. As a child of God, you are called to get out of the boat and onto the ministry playing field. The Apostle Paul, remember, wrote that there's a broad variety of gifts but the same Spirit. And there's a broad variety of activities, but again, the same Spirit. A broad variety of talents, skills, and experience, but the same Spirit. The Bible tells us that if you have a gift, a service, an activity, there's a ministry for you just waiting to be activated by God in loving service to others, to someone out there. Now, know this. There's a world of hurt out there that's desperately needing people like you to pay attention to and to minister to. If there's 180,000 people within our service area here at Zion, there's a whole lot of hurt out there that God, I think, wants to engage at Zion Lutheran Church, empower and equip, so that we don't just come and soak in a spiritual spa or get our refilled, but realize that we're Psalm 139 Christians. Read through that sometimes, Psalm 139, where God knit us together in our mother's womb to be gifted and qualified and called children of God. God gave you a specific skill set, talents, experiences, abilities, in order to give you back to a world that is desperate to receive what only you can give. Loving service to a hurting world. Remember a couple weeks ago I said that when we get to stand before God at the end of time, God is going to say, "What did you do with my son Jesus?" Second, God is going to say, "What did you do with the gifts that I gave you?" What did you do with the gifts that I gave you? You have some experience, some contacts, some networks, some hobbies that are unique to you, that can be engaged, empowered, and equipped for ministry. You're a child of God. You're not a bench warmer Bob. That's why it's so important for us to get out of the boat and onto the ministry playing field. Well, what are a couple of ways that we're going to do that, as I mentioned previously? First, after worship today, you'll be receiving a booklet that we put together for today. It's entitled Opportunities at Zion. It describes many different kinds of ministries that we have here at Zion, most of with contact information about how you can be involved. It's organized around the marks of worship and fellowship, learning and service. So take it home with you, read through it, and over the next couple of months, try to find an additional place to fit into our ministry playing field here. My hope this fall is that we'll grow and expand the way in which people are involved so that you can discover your unique, specific gifts for ministry. Read through those current ministry opportunities and find a place to fit in. Second way we're going to do that is in January, we're going to be offering a class, a couple weeks, with homework that will help you discover ways in which you are shaped for ministry. It's a shaped spiritual inventory that deals with SHAPE, your spiritual gifts that many churches just stop at, but there's so much more to it. Your heart, what you're passionate about, your abilities, kind of an inventory with that, your personality. Some people are extroverted, some are introverted. Well, how does that all fit together? And then your experiences, your positive but also your challenging experiences. Sometimes when you've been through a challenging experience and recovered from that, then that sometimes is a place for specific ministry. Then through next spring, through Lent, through the summer, we'll keep in touch about your shape and find places for that ministry to flourish, whether it's in one of our current ministries or whether it's starting a new ministry with people gifted in the same way and passionate about the same things. So, what if? What if Zion Lutheran Church was known throughout Redmond and beyond as a place where believers are equipped for ministry? That would be the first mark of a healthy church. Let's close in prayer. Dear Heavenly Lord, we thank you this day for your church. We thank you that we're gathered here to be sent into the corners of our worlds as ministers of the gospel. So engage us, loving God, empower us, equip us for the ministry that you have gifted and qualified and shaped us for. Forgive us for the times that we put up a do not disturb sign on our hearts of faith, and help us instead to be available to be engaged in the ministry that you have prepared for each one of us. Bless us, dear God. Bless our church. Bless us as we seek to be ministers of the gospel of Jesus Christ. In his name, amen. Let's stand and sing.